after the talk for questions, comments, and discussions. But if you have any questions or comments in the meantime, feel free to type them into the chat function, and we'll be able to access them at the appropriate time. So today we are so fortunate to hear from Dr. David Greenfield, the founder and clinical director of the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction. He is also medical director of the Greenfield Recovery Center, a residential treatment center for Internet and technology addictions. Dr. Greenfield is assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at UConn School of Medicine, where he teaches behavioral addiction. He's board certified in addiction medicine, clinical psychology, and psychopharmacology. Dr. Greenfield is the author of multiple articles, book chapters on internet and technology addiction, as well as his own book, Virtual Addiction, which way back in 1999 rang an early warning bell for a growing problem. Dr. Greenfield's recent work focuses on the neurobiology of compulsive screen use, and he's credited with popularizing the variable reinforcement model of behavioral addictions. He shares his expertise with the international community through research, popular presentations, and lectures like this one. Dr. Greenfield has appeared on CNN, Good Morning America, The Today Show, Fox News, NPR, and HBO. He's also been featured in U.S. News and World Report, Newsweek, People, Time, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, The Economist, you name it. Personally, I've had the pleasure of collaborating with Dr. Greenfield on several different projects, and every time I always learn something new from him. His clinical experience and his insight into the syndrome of internet addictions are really unmatched, and I'm sure you'll find that his teaching style is uniquely engaging and memorable. Without further ado, I give you Dr. David Greenfield.
Hi, everybody. It's a very odd thing to talk to an audience without physically being there, since I can't see you, but I'm going to trust you're really there. So this is a leap of faith. Here's the QR code that Dr. Weigel had mentioned, and then I'll also show it at the end as well. So I'll leave that on for 2 seconds, and then it'll be available at the end as well. If you miss it, just let me know, and we'll make sure you get it. This is the CME disclosures. I also have another slide that makes it a little bit simpler, but essentially I have nothing to disclose in terms of conflict. This is my areas that I'm currently working in as well with regard to disclosures.
In today's modern world, you can watch what you're doing, or you can watch where you're going, but you can't do both. And now, you don't have to, thanks to Guiding Hands. At Guiding Hands, we understand how important it is to stay connected when you're on the go. Simply request a guiding hand, and within seconds, we'll be at your side, ready to guide you to your destination. Let us navigate your world, so you can navigate the web. Your guiding hand will take care of all the pesky distractions that once forced you to look up. We look out for you, so you can keep an eye on the things that matter most. Enjoy the security that comes in knowing you are finally, truly connected. You'll never have to look up again. Ever. That's a promise. Guiding Hands. We got this.
So that joke, that's from Conan O'Brien. It's not too far from the truth in terms of the amount of time that we spend on our devices. Just one startling statistic. Right now, we're pushing between 6.5 and 7 hours a day spent on our digital portable devices like smartphones. And if you add that with rest of the screen time, in some demographics, we're pushing 10, 11, 12 hours a day in addition to our work or schooling. This is an article that appeared in 1999, and this is what the world thought an internet addict looked like in 1999. And as you can see, times have changed. This is actually, believe it or not, me. And it took 6 hours to get this wonderful photo of me, and I probably never looked so good. It is it shows that really they saw the internet back then as this sort of secret place that you would go to in an isolated room, and it was sort of almost a clandestine type of process. But that's really not what we're seeing now. If you look on the right, you'll see a basic outline of what we're going to talk about, but I'll go into more detail about this.
It's real and it's dangerous. Our David Scott has the details.
School is out for the year in the small East Texas town of Winsboro, and 16-year-old Nico Perez is spending this summer afternoon in his favorite place, in front of the screen, immersed in a hobby he says his parents couldn't possibly understand.
They definitely don't get this because they never had this when they were growing up. It's just like so interesting.
But for Nico, video gaming isn't just a hobby. It is, his mother says, an obsession, one that really took root last year.
He would play it all day long.
What do you mean all day long?
I'm talking from when he would wake up in the morning to when he went to bed, finally passed out at night.
So is this a whole video?
Katie Perez says she tried everything to curb Nico's gaming, from weekly limits to prohibition. But she says the more she restricted him, the more desperate he got.
I would go in and tell him, hey, it's time for dinner, or we're going to go to the mall today, or we're going to the movie theater. He would throw a fit. He didn't want to leave because he didn't want to leave the game. And so it significantly changed to me who he was as a person.
Changed him?
Yes.
The changes in Nico have convinced his mother that there's something to heed in this powerful new gaming technology.
When you stop participating in things in your life that you once cared so much about, and you start changing habits and behavior and personality, there's only one obvious answer. It's addictive.
So obviously that was shot pre-COVID because she's talking about going to the movies and to the mall. And that almost sounds like a foreign concept to me right now when I look back on that video. But the story that she's talking about is pretty consistent. And I want to tell you a couple of quick stories. And these are two cases that came in the last 2 months in my office. One is a 24-year-old, soon to be 25-year-old young man who went to college for a couple of semesters, flunked out. And this is a very typical presentation of what I see. Went to college, flunked out, took a couple of courses each semester, decided he couldn't handle it. And he was living home, and he has lived home and not essentially left his room for the last 5 years. And that is not an unusual presentation in one form or another, where there is an attempt at launching, and then there is a regression back into the use of screens, particularly video games, but other forms of screen use as well. And we'll go over some of the major areas that we see on screen use. The only diagnosis that's really officially recognized, both as a provisional category in the DSM-5 as well as in the ICD-11, is video game addiction or compulsive video game use. What I have on the screen now is the ASAM short definition of addiction. I really like this definition, and I do use these slides from time to time with my patients. It's very important for them to understand the neurobiology and how addictions work, because very often when they come in with a degree of shame and guilt and confusion, and they don't understand, and they've been told all along that they're just lazy, or they have a problem, or they don't want to work, or they don't want to go to school. By the way, the other person I forgot to mention before is 29 years old and was about ready to lose his job because he was staying home for 2 months straight, gaming 12 to 14 hours a day. And again, those are extreme cases, but not very unusual in terms of the kind of cases that I see. So back to the ASAM definition. So essentially, ASAM a number of years ago realized that addiction is addiction, and that it doesn't matter what the intoxicating substance is, meaning it can be a behavior or it can be a substance. So they included behaviors as a means to activating the reward pathways. And what's interesting, of course, is that the neurobiological research, both scanning studies as well as other studies, really show the same reward pathways being activated in the limbic system that you would see with other substance use or pathological gambling, which is really the only major behavioral addiction that we can really compare internet addiction to. Now, internet addiction, of course, is a very broad category, and it includes a variety of content areas on the screen. And I want to say that it's really an interaction between the delivery mechanism, meaning the screen or the internet, actually, because none of this would be here without the internet. And then the form of stimulating content that is delivered through the screen or through the internet. And it's a synergistic amplification, and I'll show you more of these a little bit later, between the delivery device, which, for lack of a better word, is the hypodermic, and then the content, which is essentially the drug. When you combine a very fast delivery system with a potent stimulating drug, let's say video games or pornography or social media, you have this synergistic amplification. And of course, just like we see with substance use, the faster the drug gets into the system, the more likely and more addictive that drug is. So when you have a delivery mechanism that the body absorbs quickly, that drug becomes that much more addictive. So what we're seeing, and what I've seen since I've been at this for quite a while now, since the mid-1990s, is that the faster technologies, the faster and more rapid these technologies are accessible, the more likely people are going to have a problem with it. Now, this gives me great pause when we think about the advent and the upswing that we're getting with 5G, meaning that you're going to have access to technology, to internet feeds between 10 and 25 times faster than you have now. So think about the reward latency and how quickly you're going to get a hit between the click and the content that you're looking for online. So I like this definition because it's very simple, and it really helps people understand that they really fit into this category. Addiction is characterized by an inability to consistently abstain, impairment in behavioral control, craving, diminished recognition of significant problems with one's behavior, and interpersonal relationships. Now, my patients all fit into that category, some more than others, but they're all having difficulty in having and have some deleterious impact on their life spheres in some way. They generally do not see me right away. Often they have seen another behavioral health or addictions professional prior to seeing me. And one of the things that we know about this population is that if you provide typical mental health treatment for them, they do not get better. In other words, even if they have co-occurring or comorbid issues, and often they do, whether it be causative or resultant, they will not get better if you don't address the addictive pattern. So often they'll come in, of course, with depression, with anxiety, a very high comorbidity or co-occurrence with ADHD. In some cases, the literature is talking about 85 to 90%. Based on my experience, I see it about 90 to 95% of the time. So some people would say, well, that's the issue. They have ADHD, and that's why they have a high stimulatory threshold. So they get on a screen, and that's what crosses that barrier and gives them that dopaminergic hit. And as you know, they're already dopaminergically impaired if they have ADHD. But that's not really the case. If that were true, if we treated ADHD, suddenly they would have a normal pattern of behavior, and that's far from the truth. So let's move on. So this is something that all of you know and you've seen a million times. This is just a basic drawing of the limbic system and the reward pathways. All of these structures seem to be involved, most notably the nucleus accumbens, ventral tegmental area, but all of these, and the striatum as well. But really, a lot of the scanning studies that were done really look at the postsynaptic innervation around the nucleus accumbens with regard to dopamine. So essentially, when they're engaged in various screen activities, the NA lights up like a Christmas tree, not unlike cocaine, sex, food, and other stimulating behaviors or substances. Addiction is really a neurobiological process, more specifically a biopsychosocial process, but it really always involves the reward circuitry in the brain. Patients really appreciate hearing this because, again, they come in thinking that there's some character defect and they're just lazy, which is what they've been told often by friends and family. So these are some of the addiction neurophysiologic changes we see with addiction, changes in white matter, axonal thickening, dendritic spread, postsynaptic D2 receptor proliferation, which is what we just talked about, dysregulation in the mesolimbic D2 circuits, and then disruption of learning and memory. Very, very common to see all of these or many of them in these cases. This is just a recent slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there's a great study that Cuss and Griffiths did in 2012 where they looked at 18 studies, neurobiological imaging studies, and really found compelling evidence for similarity between many different types of addiction, including process or behavioral addictions such as internet and video gaming addiction. I think that that's kind of a game changer, the recognition that we're not dealing, because the word game is in it, and because the concept of being addicted to a screen is a little bit hard to understand at first. But again, what you have to understand is that it's a psychoactive medium, and it is providing stimulating content directly into your nervous system. It's just not doing it through liver metabolism. It's doing it in a more direct way to your central nervous system. By the way, that reference, sorry, let me go back. If anybody needs any of these references, I can get them to them. So I want to just mention real quickly the evolution. I'm very interested in evolutionary biology and addiction because I don't think addiction is an accident. I think it's a naturalistic phenomena. I don't think it's pathological in the sense that we all have the capacity to develop addiction, because addiction is hardwired really into our survival circuits. But all addictions, in some sense, are piggybacking or hijacking primitive reward survival circuits. So what that means is that the evolution of the reward circuitry in the brain had a functional purpose. And that functional purpose largely was maximization of pleasure associated with the procreative force and sustenance. So why is food so dopaminergic enervating? Because it better be, because you need to get it in order to survive. And obviously, procreation is necessary for survival as well. So really, the theory is that all addictions on some level are piggybacking these original pathways. And in some sense, the brain is fooled, along with the rest of the body, that an addictive substance or behavior has physiologic survival value. And it's sort of repeating a pattern irrationally and compulsively, and certainly to our own detriment, that has an automatic survival value that is borrowed from long ago. And as you know, the limbic system is millions and millions of years old. You know, the cortex, not so old. So the cortical suppressive circuits, which we'll talk about in a second, have taken a long, or not as well designed. And one of the things that we know about addiction, which is fascinating, is that when you activate those reward circuits, there is a suppression of executive function in the prefrontal cortex. And then, so again, why would that be? Why would we have a suppression? And I think there is an adaptive context to that as well, in the sense that it makes a logical sense that you would want to suppress executive functions when it comes to basic core survival behaviors. If you're if you're looking for food, obviously we're thinking mammalian development here a long time ago. It doesn't, but even when we look at human development over the last 20 to 50,000 years, it makes perfect sense that it would not be to our evolutionary advantage to stop and think about the food before we go hunt it, or to think too much about our mating behavior before we do it. So in a sense, what's happening with addiction is it makes sense that there would be a reduction in access to the reward circuits. There's another reason, to the executive function circuits. There's another reason, which I'll talk about in a second. So this is just a repetition of some of the things we see in addiction-related brain changes. Desensitization, another way of talking about that is upregulation and tolerance. Yes, we do see upregulation and tolerance with screen use, meaning that you either need more stimulating behavior on the screen or frequently more content, more time. So, for instance, if we're looking at the screen behavior of pornography, and this is something that I've seen quite a bit in my practice, they have to spend more and more time and look for more and more unique or novel stimulating images to get the same hit. In other words, there's some tachyphylaxis and tolerance that's developed to the imagery, and over time, their use, both time and intensity, increases. And people get into a lot of trouble, both legally and in terms of their job and obviously their relationships with regard to that behavior. Sensitization, downregulation as well. We already discussed that a little bit, so I'm not going to, but you do end up seeing what we call reward deficiency syndrome. I'm not going to spend too much time on that now, but essentially that's probably one of the hallmark sequelae of internet addiction is this reward deficiency and lack of pleasure from anything else other than the screen. And there is this pattern of behavior where only the screen provides some stimulation and gratification, and everything else shrinks. Now, we see that in all addictions to some extent. The world shrinks and the addiction becomes the center focus. There is a neurobiological reason for that, and that's what we call reward deficiency syndrome. Hypofrontality is what I just talked about poor access to the prefrontal areas with regard to executive functions, and poorer inhibitory control. And there's an altered stress response, particularly in the dysregulation in the amygdala and the hypothalamic pituitary axis. This is just some scans. This is not specifically with regard. I don't have a good scan photo of internet addiction, but this just shows the activation differences in addiction versus a normal brain. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one.
Can I see this?
Not so easy to watch. And addiction in the formation. So believe it or not, that video goes on for probably a minute and a half. I mean, I spared you watching it because I actually couldn't watch it. I couldn't watch the whole thing. It was too upsetting. Now she's laughing. The mom is laughing throughout this. She thinks it's cute that the child starts to cry when she takes away the phone, and then she gives it, and she does that 4 or 5 times, and then that's the end of the video. So, what she's obviously doing is both classically and operantly conditioning this kid to love the screen and to develop intolerance, the inability to have access to the screen. So we start them pretty early. That's really early, obviously, but that's not atypical. You'll often see, and this really upsets me when I see this, you'll see people walking their children in carriages, and the parent will have a phone that they're looking at while they're walking the child, and the child will have a tablet or a phone in the carriage. Very, very typical. Now, you tell me how much each of them are paying attention to the other at that point. So that brings up the issue of GABA and a regulation of dopamine. So we know that addictions are that adolescents are particularly susceptible to addiction, and often addictions start in adolescence. And the reason for that, of course, is complicated. There are a number of developmental issues obviously, and a lot of developmental imperatives that occur, and a lot of hormonal issues. But the essential process that we see occurring with regard to adolescence is, I'm just going to go ahead for a second and show you a slide, is there's sort of a peaking of sensitivity in the nucleus accumbens that occurs around, it varies between 13 and 16. This isn't marked for age, but this just gives you a graphic representation. And a slower development of the prefrontal area or executive functions. And, we all know this, and we hear this over and over again, that it takes a long time, up to the mid-20s, for children to grow into adults and to develop the executive functions or mature executive functions in the orbital prefrontal area. What's really interesting with this population is we're seeing a delay of that. I mean, we're seeing a delay not just behaviorally, but neurobiologically. They don't have that normal window where they operate at the same time sequence that we typically see. So I'm going to go back for a second. So essentially, at the same time that you have high levels of dopamine development in adolescence, you also have low levels of GABA. And as you know, that dopamine is an excitatory transmitter, GABA inhibitory. And there's sort of a push-pull process that occurs in a mature brain where there's a control, the cortex sort of tamps down the activation and excitation, and it's sort of it works. Adolescence, it doesn't work as well because we don't have that development available. So it's a perfect storm for the development of addiction in the sense that you have high drive for pleasure and not a lot of good braking system provided, along with inexperience and other things that we see in adolescence, like social immaturity and the belief that they'll live forever and that they're invulnerable. This is one of the reasons why adolescents are prone at times, and I don't mean this pathologically, they're prone to make some decisions that are not necessarily all that great. That same difficulty with making great decisions makes them more prone to develop an addiction. Oops. So this is pretty much what I just said. So this is interesting. Nora Voclo is who many of you know, head of NIDA, came up with something interesting. As you know, adolescent substance abuse has been dropping, alcohol and substance abuse. The numbers are down a little bit. So she was positing why that was the case. And one of the things she mentioned is, by the way, not including marijuana. Marijuana is up, but other drugs and alcohol seem to be down. So it may not be a pure analysis here, but one of the things that she talked about is that there may be a displacement of the intoxicating effects and the developmental place of substances within an adolescent's world because they are getting their hits from dopamine and from their screens. And in some sense, they don't need to go anywhere because anywhere comes to them all the time. So I think it's an interesting theory. There's no research yet that really has proven this, but I think it's an interesting hypothesis and probably not that far off, because if you really look at most adolescents, their phone is in their hands pretty much from the time they get up in the morning till the time they go to bed. And I wish I could say it's only adolescents, but it's really becoming adults, and not only adults, but older adults as well. I think this is great. This is actually an old one because you can see that the monitor is old and flat and his mouse is wired, but I love it. It says, if you can't read it, I'm worried Phil's an internet addict. He just snorted his mouse. So that came out in that one came out in the in the late 1990s. So we've sort of been doing this for a while now. So these are just some of the areas of content that tend to be overused and abused online. Pornography, as I mentioned, endless variable choice and stimulation, video gaming, of course, which is behaviorally engineered to captivate and addict. They use behavioral scientists, behavioral engineers, brain scientists to help design the games to make them as captivating and as addictive as possible. Social media, there's been, and by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, there's a great movie on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. And if you want to learn how social media is designed and what the brilliance of the addictive nature of social media, watch that film. I believe it's on Netflix right now. It's a documentary with some dramatization in it, but it's very well done, and it's quite powerful and a bit upsetting as well. But essentially, social media contains the main thing is social validation looping, which is you put something up, somebody likes it, and then you're more likely to then post again because you've been reinforced socially for what you posted. And that's social validation looping. But what's really interesting is most of the social media providers don't provide the likes or comments instantly. They dole them out in a variable format, and which is the most resistant form of reinforcement to extinction. So it's not a one-to-one ratio. So the idea is you'll keep checking back over and over again. And remember, all internet service and all content on the internet exists to keep your eyes on it. That's why it's there. It's not free. If you think something is free, you're really the medium. In other words, what your attention is the monetary process. They want your eyes on screen. It doesn't matter what the content is. The idea is to keep you on screen because then they can sell you things and also farm your data. The other area, of course, is infotainment, and that's a term that I've used before. I don't know if other people have used it, but I like it because it really captures. If you ever check your news in the morning, your news is peppered with all sorts of ads, and you can't tell what's the news and what's an ad and what's entertainment, and it's all mixed together, and all that's designed to keep you on that screen. And I call it infotainment because it really is a form of entertainment, and that's what they want to keep you doing. It's not about showing you the news. It's about keeping you entertained and therefore keeping you on screen. It's all about being on screen. Online gambling is another area. Dating sites, believe it or not, can be quite addictive. YouTube and Reddit, very popular. Now, particularly among video game addiction, we will see people who overuse video games access a variety of video platforms, especially YouTube. If they can't play the game, they're going to watch the game, or they're going to watch someone else playing the game, or they're going to read about the game, whether they read about it on Reddit or other platforms, or they watch someone playing on YouTube. And as you know, the brain is stimulated in very much the same way from watching and reading about it as they are from doing it. The old studies that looked at people playing tennis versus watching tennis, and the same areas of the brain were innervated, is sort of what I'm talking about here. So it's very important that if you're going to limit a patient's access to video gaming, and we do that, and I'll mention that in a little bit, you have to limit their access to YouTube and Reddit and some of the other platforms, because they'll just find another place to get their content and stimulate them. So in our residential center, obviously there's no screens available. In our outpatient center, obviously you can't stop people from having access to screens, but we will put blocks in place and filters and monitors that will block access to their most problematic content, at least for a period of time where we can achieve a detox and get a little bit of a rest on those neural pathways. Online shopping, by the way, and I will admit freely, full disclosure, that I think I'm an Amazon addict now. And if I wasn't an Amazon addict before COVID, I'm definitely an Amazon addict now, because I looked on my statistics, and I think I had well over 100 orders in the last 6 or 8 months. So, and the reason why it's so easy to become addicted to it is because of the simplicity of being able to order it. And there is a dopamine hit when you order and then when you receive. And what a lot of people don't know is that the biggest hit with regard to dopamine and behavioral addiction or any behavior is the anticipation of receiving that content. It's not the content itself. You get 100% more innervation on the anticipatory side, which is why with substance addiction, A trigger occurs when you start to think about or plan the idea of relapsing. The actual relapse has a lower level of dopaminergic innervation. So anticipation is a big issue with addiction, and in some sense, even more dangerous with regard to stimulation. That's why relapse prevention planning is so important in all addictions. This is just a statistic, 8.5% of U.S. youth addicted to video games. And the studies are all over the map. I've seen percentages as low as 1% and as high as 10 and 12%. We don't have a consistent research protocol in terms of defining what addiction is, and that's one of the problems. We do have a set of diagnostic criteria that are pretty well established now, both in the DSM-5 as well as in the ICD-11. But in terms of the research protocols, there's not a consistency to them. And I don't know if it's as high as 8.5%, but I do know that there are millions of people in the U.S. that are dealing with this. And if you look around the world, I've lectured in Asia and Europe quite a bit, and in South Korea and China have a huge problem with internet use and particularly video game use, to a point where it's impacting their youth cultures. So I just want to mention porn very quickly, because you may see that in your practices. 40%, this is a startling statistic. When I was doing research, I did a whole presentation on porn, which is not an easy thing to do, even in a medical environment, because there are so many reactions and feelings and so many political and social, rightfully, and moral issues associated with porn. But when I talk about porn, I'm talking about it strictly from a medical and scientific perspective. But this statistic was startling to me. 40% of Americans receive no sex education. So in some sense, the internet and porn particularly may fill the gap. And this is another statistic that just is mind-blowing and probably an underrepresentation. About 1/3 of all web browser searches. So that means every Google search, about 1/3 of them are for pornography or adult content. And that's all the search engines, not just Google. But think about how many billions of searches there are per day. Peak hours of porn use, not at night, 9 to 5, believe it or not. Many porn companies are on the stock exchange. Porn is about a $16 billion industry and growing. And it's very much mainstream. There's a lot of controversy about that. Again, one of the biggest things about pornography is the variation and the endless availability of content and the constant search for novel stimuli, because again, people become tolerant and tachyphylactic. So they look for something else and something unique. And that facilitates an endless search and scroll for more content. The average first exposure to pornography online is a startling 10 years old. First exposure is often by 10 years old. I have some patients that were exposed at 8 years old, and not nefariously. A brother or a sister or somebody shows it to them and says, hey, look at this, usually an older one. And they say, and then of course, the brain is very stimulated by this, regardless whether you're in puberty or not. It's highly stimulating content, and that's when you end up with some precocious stimulation, and it forms a pattern. So I see people addicted to pornography by the time they're in their mid to late teens. This is about social media. I don't know if this is working. Hold on. Whoops.
The pursuit of the perfect picture caught.
You do have a Facebook page, Stan. Oh, God damn it. No, I just got that because I saw your page, Stan. Relationship status? Single?
Relationship status? I didn't even pay any attention to that.
Being single, Stan? So that you can use Facebook to find other girls? According to your Facebook page, we aren't friends.
All right, I'll add you as a friend. I'm sorry.
And you better change your relationship status to in a relationship.
How?
By editing your profile under basic information.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I just thought that was really cute about social media. This is a little startling.
The pursuit of the perfect picture cost 2 young women their lives. Last weekend, both were college students taking photos at dangerous heights. Here's Janet Shamlian.
This dramatic view is one of Arkansas's most photographed spots, where Andrea Norton, a 20-year-old college student, died Saturday taking a selfie. The next day, Fordham University senior Sydney Monfries died after falling from the off-limits campus bell tower. She reportedly wanted to take photos of the New York City skyline. And at the Grand Canyon, a tourist from Hong Kong died in March after falling from a cliff while using a selfie stick.
For some people, taking a regular photo or video at a tourist attraction just doesn't cut it. It's the extreme picture that gets the likes on social media, and many are taking big risks.
So that's what she's talking about, is that people are seeking more extreme pictures and more outrageous pictures and unique pictures because they want to get the likes and the comments, and everyone is looking for a viral photo because they want those hits and those responses. So what this is doing is it's facilitating people taking more and more risks to do more and more outrageous things to get that special photo. I'm just going to keep going because that's essentially what it is. Oh, by the way, I showed you in the beginning of the presentation a picture of what an internet addict looked like in 1998. And this is what an internet addict looks like in 2000. I think this was done in 2018 or 19. So this is PC Magazine, which is the leading magazine on technology, computers and internet technology. Very well-respected magazine. And the cover and half the stories in the magazine are on tech addiction. So this is really showing us that tech addiction has come mainstream. And when they offered to do a story about our clinic, I was quite surprised because I did not expect that they would print something like this, but it tells you where we're at right now. So I want to, and I don't know how we're doing on time. I think we're okay right now. I wanted to go over some of the reasons why the internet's so addictive, and I'm going to breeze through several of these because I want to allow some time for questions. But they are essentially, many of them are based on my original research that I did way back in the late 90s, and we had about 17,000 subjects. And we were really looking at doing a factor analysis and a variety of other statistical analyses to look at what are the factors and what were the factors that accounted for what made the internet so addictive. Some of these things are from that original study and later appeared in one of my books. But the other ideas are really concepts that I have developed since then. Shifting of time and space, I think that's pretty obvious. There's this illusion of bilocation that occurs with the internet, especially with a smartphone. This idea that you can be in two places at once. But one of the things we know, and there's this new book that just came out, which I'll show you, shameless plug. This is an edited book that I wrote a chapter in, but it's called The Attention Economy. And what's really interesting about it is that there is this belief that you really can multitask, that you really can pay attention to two places at once. And nothing could be further from the truth. You literally can only attend to one behavior at a time. So this idea that you can kind of bilocate, that you can be on your smartphone and be paying attention to a conversation or to anything else for that matter is completely erroneous. But yet there is this sort of feeling that you can do it. Also, this is the first time we've had 2+ generations raised on digital technology. So we've got all sorts of new data now that we didn't have before. Broadcast intoxication, that's what I mentioned before. And this is a bit disheartening. If you cannot record, share, and get liked or commented what you do in your life, in some sense, you didn't experience it. So the experience of life is mitigated through the ability to record it and share it, not to experience it, but to have it commented on. The paradox of that is that you're actually not experiencing it if your focus is on recording it. So I remember when I had young children, I was, videotaping and photographing everything. And in many cases, I would miss the very things that I was trying to record because I was so worried about getting it recorded. You can't be in two places at once. And I don't know that I've ever gone back and watched half of those videos. So, the idea is that the experience in the moment is really the only experience you have. And this belief that if you don't record it and get it shared, the experience has no value is part of a real syndrome that we see. This is probably one of the biggest factors that I want to emphasize. I call it the maybe factor. And this is essentially that the internet is the world's largest slot machine, and the smartphone is the world's smallest. Let me explain that really quickly. The internet operates very simply, and when I say internet, I mean every device that accesses the internet. So it could be a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop or a computer. You know, it could be a smart TV. It really doesn't matter. If you access the internet, essentially you've got the world's largest slot machine. So how does a slot machine work? You go into a casino, and I think they're open again, and you pull a handle or push a button on the slot machine, and the wheels spin, and then every once in a while you win something. You don't know when you're going to win. You don't know what you're going to win. You don't know how good that thing is or the amount of money you're going to win is. So there are a lot of variables that are unknown, and those variables change each time you pull a handle or push the button. So there is an unpredictability, but there's also a variable reinforcement schedule. And as I mentioned earlier in the talk, that variable reinforcement schedule is what compels people to do a behavior over and over again. And if you remember back to your basic behavioral science, variable reinforcement is the most resistant to extinction. So you're going to keep doing that behavior over and over and over again, even if you don't win for a long time, because just maybe you will win. And every time, and remember, anticipatory reward is even more dopaminergic than the reward itself. So you're sitting there and you're borrowing on anticipated dopamine till you get the hit, and then you get another secondary hit of dopamine, and that keeps you going over and over again. And essentially the smartphone is the smallest version because it's now a slot machine in your pocket. And every time you hear a beep or a buzz or a notification or a text or an email or a photo coming through or a social media update or a news update, you are activated to check it and see what it is. And you get an anticipatory hit when you get the notification, and then a secondary hit when you check it. So you're really walking around with a portable dopamine pump in your pocket. And everybody is susceptible to this. For the most part, if you've got notifications set up on your phone, you are susceptible to an addictive process, and the phone is conditioning you. It's not malicious or malevolent. It's just very purposeful, and there is an economic incentive for the companies that put out the technology and the content for that to happen. So that's the maybe factor. Productivity illusion. People have this illusion that computers and the internet are all about productivity. But if you look at the actual data, the amount of time people spend on these devices that are productive, meaning for school or work, is very small in comparison to the amount of time it's spent in terms of wasting time and for pleasure purposes. Time distortion and dissociation, very interesting. One of the things we discovered early on is that everybody loses track of time when they're on a screen. And I'm sure all of you that are watching have experienced this, where you go online to do something. It could be work, it could be pleasure, doesn't matter. And you think you're on for 15 minutes, and then you know that an hour and a half have passed by. So it's very dissociative and time distorting. Elevated cortisol, interesting. If you have a phone in your room, and even if it's off, if you can see it, your cortisol level will elevate. So having a phone available or accessible in your visual field will elevate cortisol. And what that does is it increases the likelihood that you're going to want to decrease that cortisol response. And the way you do that is to pick up the phone and check it, but then you end up in a repetitive cycle over and over again. So the advice that we give our patients, and that I try to do myself, is put the phone out of, not only turn off the notifications and the sound, but actually take it out of your visual field. Don't have it on the desk. And when you look at people socially interacting now, very frequently the phone is on the table, on the desk, it's out. And that's probably the worst place for it to be. Instant gratification, I don't need to explain that. It is, startling to me when I have a patient in my office, particularly an adolescent, who I'm talking to in the process of treatment, and I'll look away for 1 second because I'll hear a noise outside, And within that 1 second, maybe two, he has or she has picked up their phone and has it in their hand to check, because they could not tolerate even a moment without checking something and getting some stimulation. Another word for that is what I call boredom intolerance. We have developed a boredom intolerant culture. And I include myself in that. So I do little experiments with myself where I'll go into a waiting room and I will not take out my phone, or I'll leave it in the car. And there is, whereas years ago, taking out your phone was considered abnormal. Now, if you don't have a phone out, you're considered an outlier, and you actually feel a subtle social pressure to have a phone out, because sitting up straight and maybe looking around the room and maybe talking, God forbid, talking to another human being is considered inappropriate now. The other interesting thing about all media devices, so the internet doesn't have any boundaries. This is really important. Every form of media and entertainment has a boundary: a movie, a book, a television show, anything that we've consumed, a newspaper, anything we've consumed has a beginning, middle, and end. But the internet has no beginning, middle, and end. It's endless. And there is always another hypertext link or back link story to click on. There is never a sense that you've gone in, read what you need, and then turned it off. And that's why the news has been gamified and backlinked so much, because they want you to keep clicking. And if you have 10 minutes a morning to consume your news, they don't want you to just take 10 minutes. They want you to take 40 minutes or 60 minutes, or they want you to keep looking throughout the day and then click on, what are the top hairdos now in Hollywood, and all these other backstories that keep you on the screen. Infotainment, I already mentioned earlier. Social connection without risk. I call it social light, because people talk about social connection, but the best research that I've read is that it is a non-nutritive form of social interaction. It is social on some level, but not the same kind of social that you get from real-time interaction. Now, during COVID, it's a game changer, because the only type of social interaction we have to a large extent is through screen use. So it does present some problems. And the other interesting thing, lastly, is perceived anonymity and disinhibition. So people feel anonymous on these devices, even though, just for the record, it is the least anonymous form of communication on the planet. And they feel disinhibited. In other words, they feel like they can do and say things that they ordinarily wouldn't do, whether that's within a game through an avatar and through a role play that they're involved in, or through just the disembodiment that occurs by communicating through a screen and you're not directly connecting. We're running out of time, so I want to allow questions. So I want to just go over these real quick. These are some of the physical and psychological sequelae from compulsive screen use. This does not apply to everybody, but some of these apply to just about everybody. One of the things, speaking about excessive porn use, that I've seen clinically is men in their early 20s with ED. And, they have no physiologic basis for that ED, yet they have erectile dysfunction. And it's from sexual desensitization. I've seen more and more cases of that, and that's a real problem. Obesity, sedentary behavior, a huge issue with sleep and circadian rhythm disruption, some delay of developmental markers. We get a sort of failure to launch. And that's probably the most common overarching theme of an adolescent or young adult who's involved in internet addiction, is this failure to launch. They get their driver's license later, they reach developmental milestones later, and they lose their desire to launch into the real world, because the real world is in their box in front of them on that screen, and they don't need to go into the real world. It's kind of, and you can't really argue that on some level. But literally the average age of getting a driver's license is increased. Decreased academic and work productivity. So the reasons why people present for treatment are really very simple. Typically, always presented through a family member or loved one. That's very typical of most addiction treatment, but particularly around internet and technology addiction. it's usually a parent or a loved one that has encouraged them. Sometimes people self-present, and it's often either academic or work issues, sometimes legal issues related to getting into trouble on the internet. And then the other reason is because they have developed relationship issues. In other words, issues with their significant others or their family member. But almost the typical presentation for adolescents and young adults is severe academic inhibition. So to a point where they're not doing their schoolwork at all, and they have flunked out of high school or college. So these are somewhat extreme cases, but not at all unusual in terms of their presentation in our clinic or on our center. I mentioned this already, synergistic amplification, which is the interaction between the internet delivery mechanism and the stimulating content. It just gets it into the nervous system fast. And I already mentioned that. There's a little more. Okay, I just want to mention this real quick. So talk about stimulation. And those of you who are gamers, I am not anti-gaming. I can appreciate the desire to game, although I don't game. I have one son who's 26 who's an avid gamer. But if you compare, so the model on the lower right is what I did when I was an adolescent, for time passing and for entertainment. And as you know, it takes a long time. It has a lot of delay of gratification because it takes forever to put it together, and then you got to paint it and what have you. So think about, in terms of stimulation, which one is going to be more attractive? Building a world and conquering it, or building a model airplane. It's kind of a no-brainer which one people are going to go for. And this is what we're up against in terms of the modern world versus the pre-internet and pre-video gaming world. I'm going to talk very briefly of like 3 minutes to talk about diagnosing and assessing internet use disorder. Not hard to diagnose it and assess it because they're going to come in and the parent or loved one is going to tell you about what they're doing and what they're not doing. So the main diagnosis, without all the fancy scales, and you can go on my website and there's some screening instruments. You can use the DSM-5 or ICD-9 criteria, and they're all pretty good. But the bottom line is they're going to have some negative sequelae and some negative life sphere issues. Their academic performance, lack of sleep, depression, a variety of other issues that you're going to see, sometimes physiological issues like weight gain. And so you're going to know pretty quickly that they've got an issue with their screen use. Now, again, there are comorbid and co-occurring issues. Just don't be fooled to think that the comorbid issue is the issue, because in this population, it is not. It may be a pre-existing condition. It may be co-occurring. It may be resultant. But don't assume that if they're depressed and you treat the depression, that their video game and internet addiction will go away. That is not my experience. And that is probably the most common issue that we see, is that they've been treated in the mental health system for a while, but not really addressing the addictive nature. You still have to treat the depression, but this is no different than treating co-occurring conditions or dual diagnosis issues in substance use disorders. This is essentially our treatment protocol, and I don't have time to go into extreme detail with it, but this has been published in, Paul, do you remember the journal that was in?
It was the Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Clinics of North America, 2019.
Okay. Or maybe 2018. It might be 2018. Time flies. But so we can get you a reference to that. So this is essentially the model we use, and obviously it's not linear, but patient engagement, rapport development, understand reward and contextual factors, readiness for change, motivational interviewing, enhancement, a lot of motivational interviewing and enhancement. These people come in and they are not necessarily thrilled about being there. So you really have to work on joining with them. Sometimes I'll spend the first number of weeks, depending on which type of treatment environment they're in, just talking to them about their game, what they like about their game, because you want to bond with them and join with them. And sometimes what you're doing is just simple harm reduction. You don't have time necessarily to get them off the game, but you might get them to decrease their use. to a point where they're going to get some balance and a little bit less reward deficiency. Pattern disruption, where you're either partially or completely detoxing them. Neurobiological and psychological education. Harm reduction is what I mentioned earlier. Trigger identification, so helping them understand why and when they use their game, whether they're managing boredom, whether they're managing another emotion or behavioral issues in the home or fear or any of the major emotions. Not dissimilar from what we do with substance-based addictions. Helping them manage urges, cravings, and compulsions. This is done with a combination of CBT, EMDR, pharmacotherapy using MAT. We don't have too much time to go into the pharmacotherapy. There is no miracle pill for this. There are some good studies that have looked at acetyltitopram, that have looked at, oh my God, I'm going so fast I forgot, not buprenorphine, bupropion. There's some promising initial research on naltrexone, but there's no real pill, just like in any addiction, that solves the problem. And often, and obviously, if there is a concomitant depression or anxiety, an SSRI can be useful, but it won't cure it. Most of the patients come in on either a psychostimulant or an SSRI already. Blocking, monitoring, filtering I mentioned, so it's very important if you are going to treat these patients to have a tech person that you can work with that can help structure some limitations on their access. Unfortunately, unlike alcohol and substance abuse treatment where you're looking at abstinence, you can't have abstinence from the internet. So you've got to really look at it in terms of abstinence from the most problematic forms of content. And it's tricky. It's not a simple process. Real-time living strategies, so teaching them new strategies. Most of them their world has become so narrowed because they have had nothing else going on except their screens. You almost have to reteach them how to live in the real world. And I mean very basic. So we do a lot of work on real-time living strategies, and what I call reverse reward transfer is sort of teaching them to find reward in other activities that they've forgotten about. And then relapse prevention, tech life balance planning, real-time living strategies, boredom tolerance, you literally have to teach them, and we'll do this actually in practice in our clinic, where we'll teach them to sit for 5 minutes and do nothing. And actually, you'd think we were putting bamboo shoots under their fingernails to have them sit for 5 minutes without reaching for their screen. They literally are uncomfortable. But this can be taught over time. Very briefly, I already mentioned this, and I think we need to wrap it up because I want to allow time for questions. Strong correlation with ADHD. We think it has something to do with susceptibility to reduced dopaminergic function in the orbital prefrontal area. So that makes them a little bit more susceptible to internet addiction. But again, you can't just treat that. You have to treat both. And there you go. There is the little, whatever that is. What is that called? Activity code, QR code. So I finished. I'm sorry to rush through the last part of it, but I wanted to try to cover as much as I could. So we have some time, Dr. Weigel, for questions.
Fantastic. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Greenfield. That is such a timely and important presentation. A lot in there, and we have some great questions that I want to get to. But before we transition to that, I do want to share my reaction. And I do want to note that the article that Dr. Greenfield mentioned, which is regarding treatment of addictive internet habits, is in the April 2018, you're correct, issue of Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Clinics of North America. But if you want to email me, I'll be happy to send you a PDF, and my email is in the chat. So here at the BHN, most of our psychiatric patients do not suffer from internet addictions, but we often find that their psychiatric illnesses are increasingly intertwined with their internet habits, for good sometimes, but often for ill. Research evidence validates the time young Americans spend on screen entertainment has nearly doubled in recent decades, and the pandemic has only accelerated this phenomenon. And during that time, we've seen wonderful declines in teen homicide, auto access, pregnancy, and as you point out, most drug and alcohol use. However, we've also seen disturbing declines of healthy habits, including sufficient sleep, reading, exercise, nutrition, in-person socializing, chores, and other hobbies that teach life skills, coupled with alarming rises in failure to launch, depression, anxiety, and completed suicide. Now, for some of our patients, their internet habits, such as gaming, do become a true obsession that dominates their daily activities and wreaks havoc on their lives. Now, I work with some younger population. I work with teens at the Joshua Center, but the most common example in my practice is a teenage boy with limited academic, social, and athletic involvement who plays video games excessively at home. And I see that the gaming habit crowds out other activities, other good sleep habits, chores, and ultimately self-care. And he may maintain academically for a time because he continues to do work at school where there's no distractions. But homework is often left undone because he can't pull himself away from the gaming. Gradually, the boy falls behind because of undone homework and a sleep debt caused by late-night gaming, leading to school failure. Depression and social anxiety often ensue, and then the boy responds by clinging even more tightly to gaming as an escape. He routinely struggles to get up in the morning and eventually sees little point in going to school, where he's unhappy, uncomfortable, and unsuccessful, leading to school refusal, severe conflict with parents, and often threats of violence or suicide. In treatment, he appears to be in denial of the negative effects of his gaming habit, which he sees as the only bright spot in his life. He hopes to use treatment as a means to convince his parents to ease up on their gaming restrictions. But oftentimes positive engagement with clinicians and peers in group therapy and elsewhere lead to rediscovering forgotten hobbies, finding new ones. And this is an instrumental step in disengaging from the gaming world and re-engaging the real world. At times, I found that a total removal of gaming access from the home becomes a necessary intervention, but it is one that risks precipitating a crisis on people who are psychologically dependent on their games. So typically such cases I find are very challenging, but treatable. So at this point, I would like to transition to the Q&A section and a reminder to share any questions or comments in the VMR chat or sending me an email. We've got some already that I'll share, but I do want to start with one of my own. Dr. Greenfield, your treatment model for internet addiction is analogous in a lot of ways to therapy for treatment of substance use disorders. Yeah. Many clinicians I find that are experienced in treating substance use disorder, they feel unequipped to treat internet addiction. So how would you advise these clinicians?
Well, that's a great question. So I find that when we're hiring staff, the best staff that we can hire are people that are addictions clinicians as opposed to mental health clinicians, because they do have the basic skills and understanding on how to manage a substance use or alcohol disorder. And I think that you're right, that the skill set is very, very similar, and the understanding of having a compulsive pattern of behavior with deleterious life impact is really not new to a substance abuse clinician. So I think it's not hard to learn. They do need to learn some aspects and nuances of the drug of choice, so to speak, because if they are not screen familiar, there is a small tendency for that group of professionals to take the screen addiction less seriously, because relative to an opiate addiction, where you could have respiratory failure and die, you're not going to typically die of a gaming addiction unless you have a DVT or an electrolyte imbalance. And some people die from it, but very rare. So I think it's sort of teaching them that there's some seriousness, even though the morbidity and mortality is not the same. So I think just sort of educating that substance abuse professional about some of the uniqueness of that drug of choice, of the technology addiction drug, so to speak, is helpful.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Dr. Peter Sugarman. He asks if the neurobiological changes associated with technology addictions, are they reversible with recovery or abstinence?
Yes, so that's a great question. So Yes and no. I mean, certainly the white matter and gray matter changes seem to be reversible, and as well as some of the changes in the reward circuitry. But the best thinking with regard to reward sensitization is that once you sensitize these reward pathways, there is a sort of facilitated kindling effect that kind of remains. You've sensitized these pathways, and the ability to relapse is always sort of potentially there. The best data is that the longer you're in some kind of abstinence or recovery, for lack of a better word, the less likely you'll have that kindling response. But the best information that I know is that there is some permanent change to the reward circuitry, but that over time that degrades and it atrophies, but never to zero as far as I know.
Thank you. Sounds like similar to other addictive processes.
Very similar.
Our next question is from Sam Mishaw. He asks if the cortisol spike you described when the smartphone is in the room, in vision but not being used, does that occur in other addictions as well? So, for instance, someone trying to abstain from cigarettes, seeing a pack of cigarettes.
Well, you know what? That's a really great question, and I would love to know the answer to that. I'm going to guess that it does, but I actually do not know the factual answer. I would not be surprised if it does. And it would make sense, because if that's the object of your addiction, it would make sense that there's some elevation of cortisol in relation to seeing that pack of cigarettes or that bottle of liquor or whatever substance it is. That's a great question, actually, and I'm trying to look that up. Thank you for the question.
All right. This question comes from Vanessa Cardella. She was wondering what the long-term effects of early internet addiction, like the baby that you showed in the YouTube video using the smartphone, might be. Do we know what the long-term effects are?
Yeah, I'd like to know where that baby is now. We don't know, actually, because we're really only getting to the point where we've had fully inculcated internet and technology users start to reach adulthood into their 30s and really into their mature adulthood. So I don't think the jury is still out with regard to what the long-term effects are. We do know that there are some permanent changes in the reward circuitry, as I mentioned, but in terms of like long-term consequences in terms of learning and reward. And we do know that there are absolutely some long-term consequences in terms of delay of gratification and in terms of the ability to tolerate the ability to tolerate attention. In other words, their attention span seems to be slightly shorter. Whether these things would reverse or not is unclear, but for the most part, those are the two big things that we've seen. But we don't really have a generation of 50 and 60-year-olds yet that have grown up and used technology their entire life.
Thank you. Yeah, so more to come, unfortunately. So our next question comes from Dr. John Santapietro, who he's interested in your experience with residential care for internet and technology addiction. How effective is it, and are insurers willing to pay for it?
Well, that's a great question. So in general, the residential program that we developed, and that we're actually changing some of it right now in terms of how we're doing it. But yeah, it was very effective. But, they are isolated and they are pulled out of their real environment. So that really helps. And they have no access to their internet or screens. So in general, the data that we have, and it's very preliminary data because we don't have that many subjects yet, has been very positive. And the patient satisfaction and the family satisfaction with the treatment has been very positive. As far as insurance goes, the first iteration of the residential program was self-pay only. We did not have the capacity to accept insurance yet. Part of that has to do with the licensing requirements of the facility, and also because the ICD-11 codes are not in the EMR systems yet, and they've not dropped in terms of billing. And I don't know what's going to happen once that ICD code drops and whether we're going to have any issues with insurance reimbursement. Right now, diagnostically, we often will utilize an impulse control disorder diagnosis in addition to any co-occurring or comorbid diagnoses. So we're hopeful that either with the ICD-11 diagnosis and with a co-occurring diagnosis, we'll be able to increase the ability to bill insurance. On the outpatient side, we've been a little bit more successful because people have been able to utilize their out-of-network benefits more effectively.
Okay, thank you. We just have a couple more. Sam Shaw asked if you know anything about research evidence showing how marijuana might act synergistically with video games or other screen media.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I just had a case with a daily cannabis user, very heavy daily cannabis user and video gamer. So it was a complex diagnostic picture. And, there's not a lot of data on that. And typically, most of the cases I see do not have co-occurring substance use disorders. This is the first one that met criteria for a moderate cannabis use disorder, in addition to being a 12-plus hour a day video game addict. So I'm going to be able to answer that question better because he just finished an intensive outpatient program, and we're going to see, now that he's abstinent from cannabis, whether there's been any crossover change in his urges and cravings for the gaming. So the jury's still out on that, so I don't have a lot of data yet. And that's obviously, this is all anecdotal and clinical.
Sure, thank you. And our final question comes from Vanessa Cardella, who asks if you can speak to the use of EMDR with virtual addiction.
Yeah, so there are all sorts of new protocols that have been developed for addiction with the use of EMDR. And I've been experimenting with those for years. And we've developed a nice protocol for managing two components of internet and tech addiction. One is the reduction of urges and cravings and triggers once they're identified, and desensitizing those triggers. And then the second is treating the often underlying social anxiety that we see with this population. And I failed to mention that is another co-occurring diagnosis. So using the EMDR approach is very useful in restructuring the urges and cravings and desensitizing the social anxiety. It's a core component of our treatment protocol at this point. And there is some data in the general substance use area. I don't think there's much data yet on the use of it for internet and tech addiction.
Gotcha. Well, that's all the questions we have time for, but thank you so much, Dr. Greenfield, for sharing your expertise.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for attending the Institute of Living's virtual Grand Rounds. I hope you found today's program informative and enjoyable. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. That was fantastic.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad you like it. Thanks for your question. And that was a good question. And for your comments.
It seems like your thinking and your ideas have really evolved a lot since we talked last.
Yeah, they're constantly evolving. I find that every time I give a talk or every time I treat a patient, I kind of learn. I mean, really, my patients are the ones that are teaching me. I kind of like see things, and then I start to look at, the literature, and I start to put things together. But yeah, it's definitely evolving. I still don't know what the real true prevalence of all this is, because obviously I'm seeing a skewed sample. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to know how big an issue this is. I don't know.
Yeah. Gents, I'm going to stop recording now.
Yeah, go ahead.